Okay, so I think we are live here with Aaron Leming. The chat always fills me in really quickly. So Aaron, go ahead and talk. We've had bitches in the past where I forget to unmute something. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we should be good. I had to log into this on my phone and do it this way. So we'll see. We'll see how this works out.
trying to figure out how to get around the fact that StreamYard always wants to throw advertisements on there, but you cook up some other live streaming service like Google Meet has an hour time limit. There's a lot on the back end that always goes on that's real weird here. But Aaron,
Yeah.
how are you feeling before we start the official podcast? Bears are 2-2. Justin Fields was 19 yards per completion, 12 and a half yards per attempt. So, I'll probably ask you again when we start the official show, but good mood, bad mood, medium, where you at?
I medium. I think. It's one of those situations where I don't know. I feel like this was to kind of be expected. You'd like to see them actually. They had a 21-point lead. You'd like to be able to see them hold on to that and dominate the entire game, but it is what it is. I think this is more in line with what we should expect. Well, obviously, who knows if Justin Fields is going to start, but this is more in line with what we should expect to see from Justin Fields. It's not going to be fantastic every week, but like you pointed out, man, there's a whole different dimension of this offense today. So that is nice.
We'll talk about it. I know that what you're going to hear from me in general is all I care about this season is Justin Fields developing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like step one for a rookie, some would call it step zero, but step one for a rookie is show us that you still have the tools you had in school. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Fields has to start by showing us that ridiculous accuracy is in fact still ridiculous. And I got to be honest, the start of the game, that ball to Mooney, I was like, dadgummit, put a ball on somebody. I know you can. Just show us you can. And oh gosh, did I get my wish there, because he was stapling the ball to people 40 yards away by the end of the field. So
yeah, he was, dude. He was. Yeah, that was definitely a lot of what he did today was more of Justin Fields at Ohio State that we're used to. And I think my only real issue, and I don't even think it was really with him. I mean, well, I guess the clock is still obviously not there, and that'll come with time, and we've talked about that. But my biggest issue was the fact that they didn't seem to trust him in the red zone today. And obviously, they had the 3 touchdowns, but you'd like to actually see him be able to throw the ball on first and second down instead of having 2 runs. But, as we're seeing, man, it's Matt Nagy, and I think we both agree probably Maggie. Bill Lazor's. Yeah. Bill Lazor's probably calling the plays at this point. I think we could probably agree on that, but it's still Matt Nagy's offense. It's still Matt Nagy's team, so it's going to take a while.
I will say this here on the YouTube pre-show, and I won't say this in the game, because or not in the game, in the recording, because I think it's a little too tinfoily for megaphone. But Aaron, as somebody who is not in the room and whatnot, I could not help but feel like they didn't want to give Justin Fields the statistics that made him unbenchable. I mean, I don't want to be ridiculous here, but because it could have easily been rookie jitters. It could have easily been a billion things, but because the run game worked, they scored 3 touchdowns. Certainly, it's not as if they gimped their offense necessarily in the red zone, because they were 3 out of 4 trips, and those 4 trips looked good, but I don't think they don't want to go back to Dalton. And if he had come out of this game with 3 touchdowns and a pick, he's the starter. And I don't know. I can't shake it that he ends up with, Aaron, he ended up with 17 attempts. Think about that for a second. He milked 210 yards out of 17 attempts. Mm-hmm. Goodness gracious. It's the Bears were committed to the ground game, which is, it's admirable. It's neat, but it also kind of felt to me like they just wanted to make sure they could still go back to Dalton when they wanted to go back to Dalton. And I don't know. Super excited about Fields, super excited about the future, but this was another one of those moments that made me go, maybe the org is not where we want it to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. But you know what? In a very worst case scenario, though, I think we can both agree that at least if Justin Fields goes back on the bench next week, assuming that Dalton's healthy, which I would expect at this point, at least we know that he's going to go back on the bench with some confidence, and he's not going back on the bench with that terrible, terrible game from last week. And I think we also saw, I get it, the Browns defense and then the Lions defense, you can't compare. But I think that we saw a nice bounce back this week. I don't care if it was against a JV team; it doesn't matter at this point. The fact is there seemed to be no lasting effects from last week, which is
Right.
good. I think that's, again, that goes back to Fields' development, and even if he starts 6-7 games all this year, whatever it is, if we can see more of what we saw today, I think everybody should be feeling pretty good going in 2022. This isn't a playoff team. We know that, though.
No, absolutely. Well, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and kick off the show.
Let's roll.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And I am coming at you live right after the game. Things just wrapped up in Chicago with none other than CBS Sports and also Windy City Gridiron's Aaron Leming to break things down. Aaron, the Bears have their second win of the season in 4 games. How are you feeling?
Not great, not terrible. Just kind of, they did what they needed to do, right? So, anybody who's watching this, just realize I'm on my phone. I can't get my computer to work. This feels like a really awkward angle. So, but yeah, they got the win, right? And that's kind of the thing. I think there was a lot of people, like, for as optimistic or as pessimistic as you want to be about this season, you don't lose the Lions, right? So at least that didn't happen, because I know there were some people talking about, Matt Nagy possibly losing his job if they lost. I don't think that was ever the case. But you never root for your team to lose, especially this early on in the season, especially when you don't have a first-round draft pick in 2022. It just doesn't make any sense.
Oh, no. And not to mention, Aaron, one thing I think we can just start the show off with, because I saw a lot of discussion on Twitter, even in the Windy City Gridiron comments section, about how the Bears were probably going to lose to the Lions. Oh, man, this is going to be a tougher game than we think. And don't get me wrong, the Lions are scrappy, but I do get the impression that there was some major overreaction to getting beat by one of the best defenses in football. Even if today they stymied the Vikings after an initial touchdown, so at least they're starting to make us feel better about getting destroyed last week. But the downgrade in opponent from Browns to Lions, fair to say that's probably one of the steepest drop-offs the Bears are going to see this season.
It probably will be the absolute steepest drop off. You're talking one of the best defenses in the NFL, and then one of the absolute worst defenses, and just really worst team in the NFL. And to the Lions' credit, they're rebuilding. These are the games. Again, regardless of how bad the season goes, these are the games the Bears have to win. And for the most part, even with the Bengals game, the Bengals are 3-1, but the Bengals, I think everybody would agree that the Bengals are still in the process of kind of figuring out who they are as a team. But these are the kind of teams that you have to beat, and these are the kind of games that you have to win. So, it's one of those things. Again, I think the biggest piece of importance right now is Justin Fields' development. And whether or not we see him next week, I guess we'll find out. I don't think we will. It is what it is. But at the same time, if this is how he goes back on the bench, if this is the type of performance that he goes back on the bench with, that's a heck of a lot better than going back to the bench 6-20 for 60 some odd yards like he was last week. So I'll take it at this point.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think is hilarious, by the way, about this game. So look, unfortunately, I am an analyst that started his career analyzing the Bears. So I have done a lot of justifying or breaking down or combing through, basically telling people that the quarterback, who's bad, their box score isn't great, but they played better than, I don't know what it would be, like 22 for 40 with, you get the idea. This box score is a real liar, because Fields comes in at 11 for 17, 209 yards, 0 TDs, and 1 INT. And normally you might look, if you think about it, and say, wait, that's a ton of yards per attempt. But I don't normally look at completions per attempt standard, but in this case 209.01, obviously that's not a great line. My goodness, was Justin Fields throwing the hell out of the ball today, or what? After one goofy pass to Darnell Mooney, he stapled it to Mooney for 125 yards, Robinson for 3 catches, 63. The Bears' number 1 and number 2 receivers showed out in a big way today, and Fields' arm only seemed to get more and more and more impossibly accurate as it went on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, man. It's this is going to be one of those games where if you're a box score scout, then you're going to have the ability to kind of go back and say, okay, well, he wasn't really that good. He's not ready. That was the narrative all of last week, right? Or all of this week, more to the point. He's not ready. He's not ready. He's not ready. It's like, yeah, but it's, if you look at the box score, don't get me wrong, Justin Fields was bad last week, but so were about 5 other things offensively that contributed, really big to that. So yeah, it's one of those things. I think for the most part, Justin Fields had a really good game. And once again, and not to make excuses, but once again, guys need to make plays. Cole Kmet, looking at you, man. Like, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, you're 250, 260 pounds. Play like it. Don't play like an 180-pound receiver. It's like the one where he fell down on the deep pass that Justin Fields actually threw really well. Same thing in the end zone. Yes, he was being held. Act like you're 260 pounds, man. Those are the kind of things where I think as time goes on, those are the things that will absolutely get squared away.
Oh my gosh. I mean, we have to talk about some of the throws because I want to get into scheme, but let's start with the obvious stuff. When Fields dropped back in the shotgun, laced I think I counted, it was 50 yards as the crow flies to Darnell Mooney in, I think, either the late first quarter, early second. Either way, that was that eye pop moment I know Chicago was waiting for. I can only imagine what it was like for Jeff Berkus, Ross Reed, and the other guys we know in the stands at that point. But then he follows it up with a teardrop to Darnell Mooney that had accuracy we haven't seen in literal years in Chicago. A beautiful, looked like a cover 2, it might have been cover 4, but probably a cover 2 hole shot to Allen Robinson that was impossibly accurate. I mean, it couldn't have been better thrown, as well as a couple balls over the middle, so on and so forth. This game, from an analysis perspective, especially having watched the Bears for forever, left me just about breathless at Fields' ability to throw the ball deep. And like you're saying, I mean, God forbid he doesn't play another down for Chicago this season, but if he doesn't, I'm pretty confident because he made some more rookie mistakes. I can't pretend like Fields' game was flawless today. The strip sack, gotta get the ball out. The interception, look, being ticky-tack, because everybody focuses on Fields too much. That was a great play by the Lions linebacker, but theoretically, Fields could have been just a smidge quicker on some of his short throws, but it was way better than last week. I think you'd agree there. We didn't take 9 sacks. We took, I think it was 3, maybe 2, maybe even just 1. But either way,
one. Yeah, I think it was. Go back and look. I haven't looked at the box score with anything yet, but I want to say it was just the one. It was the strip sack, I think, was the only one.
Might have been. I think that there are some of those little things Fields could do, but the nice thing is we drafted him to be a home run hitter. Today, he hit the home runs. All you could ask for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is, and I think that where the push for Fields starting, that was kind of one of the things where I think a lot of us were worried about. It's like, do not put unrealistic expectations on this guy, right? He's still a rookie. He's still, in terms of, most rookies coming out of the NFL right now. I mean, let's just be honest here. Most rookies coming out of the NFL or coming out into the NFL out of college aren't ready. No. They're not ready. The quote unquote ready. It is, but that's so subjective. And the thing is at this point in time, you let these guys learn. I mean, look at what Trevor Lawrence has done. Look at what Zach Wilson's done. Look at what Mac Jones has done. Mac Jones has probably been the most consistent. And even at that, he's basically been a game manager. Zach Wilson had a pretty solid game today. I didn't end up seeing the final score, but again, he threw another interception. And then Trevor Lawrence had his best game that he's had, through 4 games of his rookie career or his NFL career and his rookie season so far. On Thursday Night Football, and everybody's doing cartwheels. But the week before, the same exact people were talking about how disappointing this rookie class has been, and how there may not actually be a star. And that's the thing, is it's so reactive from a week to week perspective. And Bears fans have to keep the same thing in mind when we're talking about Justin Fields. There's going to be times, there's going to be games when he doesn't look good, and then there's also going to be times like we saw today where it's just like out of nowhere he makes these amazing throws, like we saw coming out of Ohio State. And I think that's kind of the big thing moving forward is, however many games, I'm sure even if he doesn't play this next week, I do think that he will play at some point again this year, right? But it's just one of those things. Everybody has to kind of keep perspective on it, right? There's going to be rookie mistakes. There's always going to be things that you can pick apart in his game this year. It is what it is.
Yep, 100%. And I mean, you said it. You said something I think is really important here. There have been so many debates on, oh gosh, the Bears are going to go back to Dalton. I mean, goodness gracious, if Zach Wilson's playing, how can Justin Fields not be ready? And it's like none of them are ready. I mean, the NFL doesn't really seem to have a good grasp on how to develop a quarterback. There's no set path at the very least. Right now, you're seeing a lot of these quarterbacks get thrown out there, but I mean, Trevor Lawrence, he's pushing the ball deep and he's getting punished for it with turnovers, interceptions, etc., etc. Zach Wilson looks like he's just really struggling. Seems pretty raw. Trey Lance isn't playing, so he's not getting criticized because you get the idea. We could do a whole thing on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Justin Fields comes out here and he just evaporates in the face of a free runner and throws the ball to Cole Kmet that would have Kmet running out in space. Like, Kmet has to break, the throw forces Kmet to break away from his wide receiver and catch, or his corner, and catch the ball running through the middle of the field where there was a ton of space. And then Kmet eats it and trips. And oh my gosh, I was pulling my hair out, Aaron, because Fields is going to be a little bit slow to throw the ball. We know that. Like, his game is touchdown to check down, and the rest of all of what is an NFL quarterback, getting the ball out, knowing when to say die, knowing when to break out, manage the pocket, run for a first down, all that stuff, all that decision making, it's going to be a little slower on, but that had the potential to be the best play of Fields' young NFL career. And you talked about Kmet. I realized that in a scatterbrain moment, I was supposed to circle back to it on my last statement. He was somebody that I wanted to see more from today. I mean, I get it. He's a blocking tight end, or at least Bears fans seem to be starting to pigeonhole him in that area. But as a second-round pick, I want him to make a play that I've seen Ben Braunecker make, that I've seen other tight ends around this NFL make, that aren't Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, and so on and so forth. Because that and selling the hold would have both been very helpful Bears offensive plays. And while it's nice that he caught a throw right on his body on, I think, a 1st and 10 later in the half, he's definitely something that I think needs to start taking that step before, or sooner rather than later, or he may have just now started to really walk down that path of making, let's say, not so positive a name for himself, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's shades of Adam Shaheen in his game, and a lot of that just comes down to, again, man, he's a big dude. He's huge. It's like, play like you're a 250 or 260 pound player. Do not play like you're a 180 pound receiver. And it's just, I don't know, man. I didn't like the pick at the time, so maybe I'm going to have a little bit of bias with it. I know a lot of Notre Dame fans like the pick. I personally did not. I thought he was more of a 3rd or 4th round tight end in a really weak tight end class. And here we are. But again, it's kind of one of those things when you have Cole Kmet, who's a 2nd round pick, and then you've got a guy in Jimmy Graham who still has not factored into anything so far. It's like you need more production from the tight ends, especially in this offense. You absolutely have to have it. And yeah, I mean, that was probably one of the big plays that really stood out to me, where that's just something that you have to have. Like, that is a play that you have to have. Cole Kmet has got to keep his feet. And then, you know, obviously the same thing with that missed touchdown. Cole Kmet has got to just, you know, either sell the play or, again, play like he's 250 or 260 pounds. Like, you can't have it both ways. And that's really what it comes down to. But, you know, it's just one of those things where this is a year where they're going to figure out a lot about their roster as a whole. They're going to figure out who they can rely on and who they can't, and go from there and figure out, because, I mean, regardless of who is coaching this team next year, they're going to need more out of their tight ends, right? I mean, I think we all know that at this point. So I guess this is at least a good time to figure out what exactly Cole Kmet is. I've always kind of felt like Kmet at best was going to be Kyle Rudolph, maybe. And there's still time, but as of right now, I haven't been overly impressed with Kmet at all so far this season.
And just to point out, because we've already talked about how reactionary week to week that a lot of discussion around the NFL can be, I am still willing to give him that 3-year window. To all the people in the chat that are saying Kmet can be that guy, I think he's got time. I don't think anybody's asking to cut the kid. We just need to see him in hockey. Aaron, I don't know how much hockey or soccer you would watch, but they would call a lot of what happened today that Kmet needs to keep his feet. That there is a reasonable standard at which somebody has been knocked down, but there's also a reasonable standard at which somebody has fallen, and it felt like Kmet slipped into that second category both times. You and I are kind of both talking about it. Now, we're also seeing a lot of conversation pop up right now about whether you think Nagy or Laser called plays. Who do you think it was and why?
I think it was absolutely Bill Lazor today. I think the panning over that they made with the sideline in the first quarter very clearly signaled that Matt Nagy was not calling plays. I mean, he was over there checking play calls off the sheet, but as play calls were coming into the huddle, he was not the one making them. So I think, at least from everything that we saw, and who knows how much grip he has on all this, I think it was absolutely 100% Bill Lazor.
Mm-hmm. I think Nagy's got input. I mean, at least he was talking in the headset, so I think he's part of the conversation. But it seemed like the Bears came into this game with a direct intention of staying under center as often as they can. Now, if I, who does not have a degree in football, let's just put it that way, could give any input, I want to see them drop Fields back a little bit, like from under center, because that seems to be the final ingredient to really building an offensive identity out of playing under center. Is that if you felt the same way I did, Aaron, it gets hilariously declarative when the Bears are like, oh, they're in shotgun, they're passing. And so if we can get away from that, that'd be great. But there's
a lot of predictability within their offense as a whole, even with their personnel sets. It's usually pretty easy to see what they're going to be doing based on how they're lined up and who they're lined up with.
Right. And in my personal opinion, I mean, when you're the Buffalo Bills and you line up in an empty set with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, and a lot of the weapons they have, sure, be predictable. There are a lot of different things that you can do in just the passing game alone that makes you more complex than that. But when you're the Bears, you probably need to hide the ball a little bit, play a little closer to Cleveland's game.
A little bit. And just, less hiding who the quarterback and the offensive play caller are, pregame, and more actually doing enough in game to hide what they're actually trying to do. Yeah, that'd probably be preferable at this point.
And I'll be the first to say, so I'm the second to say that I also think it's Bill Lazor calling the plays for sure, because it seemed as if it was the same playbook but with a different identity behind it. I just would have liked to see, and I know that there are going to be some hardcore Bears fans out there that are like, no, they pounded the rock just like they should have. I'd like to see a little bit more play action, because especially once Fields really started dropping back, I'm not sure he at any point dropped back into a play action set and didn't hit a deep throw. Like, I don't even think they forced a check down out of him, let alone anything else. And so my thinking is that when you've got that weapon, use it. But at the same time, I have no idea what really was going on. We don't know how many plays Fields does and doesn't have a grasp on. He's a rookie. We can assume it's like Madden and the player just magically knows the playbook, but we both know that's not realistic. So maybe they had him on a pitch count. Maybe they didn't want him to take hits. Maybe they wanted him to be the home run hitter that picked up all their chunk plays and then just get a whole bunch of run game work in the rest of the way. But either way, the 32nd ranked offense coming into this game certainly looked a lot better than that, if only 27th best, against a defense that probably should have done a little better at containing them, just talking about the Lions. But hey, I will take it every single time,
Yeah, this is a weird performance defensively for the Bears, and I know I had a few people that were like, earlier in the game when they were up, 14-0, like, I haven't given up any points. How can this be? How could they be looking bad at times? It's like, yeah, but they were, in my opinion, they were more lucky than good today. And yes, they had some timely turnovers, but at the same time, what was it? The first three offensive drives for them, they get all the way down within the red zone, basically inside the 10-yard line. It was more luck than anything that they didn't give up more points than they did. And obviously, looking at what the Lions have done, in some ways, it's funny. Offensively, they're kind of like the Bears. They've been able to move the ball. It's just, consistently scoring and consistently not shooting themselves in the foot, whether it's from the personnel on the field or even the coaching. I mean, that's the thing I think a lot of people forget. Like, Dan Campbell's the first-time head coach. Yes, he did have some time. What was that, in Miami, I think, when he was the interim head coach. But, you got Aaron Glenn, who's a first-time defensive coordinator. There's a lot of first times for them. I actually, for as much as I rag on the Lions, I actually think the Lions are setting themselves up good for the future. Obviously, we need to see how things play out. But it's just one of those things where, yeah, you'd like to see the Bears play better. But at the same time, the bottom line is they gave it 14 points, right? And that's really, regardless of, this what just happened today, and them giving up all the yards and them coming up with some timely turnovers, you would take this 100% of the time over what we saw in Week 1 against the Rams. And the Bears defense, for the most part, has played much better. And I think part of what today was the fact that Akeem Hicks went out really early. Khalil Mack wasn't on the field that much. So, that pass rush wasn't there like it had been. I mean, they'd been, I think, what was it? I think they'd had, was it 9 or 10 sacks the 2 games prior up until this game? They got to Goff a little bit, but not as much as they have. They weren't as good, stopping the run as well. And I think a lot of that had to do with Hicks not being on the field. So, things happen. But that's the thing, is injuries are going to continue to happen. Luckily, they got good depth there. We'll figure, we'll see what happens. But next week's going to be a really interesting test, because the Raiders, man, they've been playing really good football.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, look, it's funny because on one hand, I could tell you, Aaron, if I wanted to spin the narrative this way, that the Bears defense was timely because they got into the red zone. Robert Quinn makes an incredible individual play, forces the strip sack that we've been waiting, what do you think, 18 games to see, basically since that first snap he had in New York where he did the same thing. But at the same time, I mean, come on, Aaron, how do I make the argument that they weren't also lucky when they had a snap glance off of Jared Goff's chest and bounce straight into Nichols, who caught it? Like cat-like reflexes there from Bilal to pull that ball down. And I remember watching that play and I was like, I don't have any idea what happened. Like, how did Bilal Nichols end up with the ball? He's over there. Seeing it on the replay was...
It almost looked like a Madden glitch, didn't it?
One of the most Lions things I've ever seen.
Yeah. That was weird. And then it's funny because then, later on in the game, I think it was Travis Gibson had the strip sack, and it bounces right back to Jared Goff and he gets 6 yards up. So it's just one of those, it better to be lucky than good sometimes, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think you might have actually been the one to say that in real time.
And it's the sort of thing that I look at, Aaron. The most positive thing I could say about it is that I think that there's just about nothing harder in the NFL to this day, like in this day and age anyways, than playing extremely well on defense twice in a row. It's really tough. Like, defense especially, you have to have so many things go right. You can't draw a penalty, which the Bears did a ton of today, committing different penalties of all shapes and sizes. You have to suss out the opponent's game plan. You have to take away whatever it is that they want to do. In Desai's case, you have to deal with the fact that you're still playing Duke Shelley, Deion Bush is fine, Kendall Vildor is okay, and Alec Ogletree really struggles in coverage. So you've got enough problems on your defense, and certainly Deion Bush blew a coverage, which did not help anything later in the game. After a game like the Bengals, which was followed up with a game like the Browns, a down week made sense. As it happened in real time, I found myself going, what was I asking this Bears defense to be? Like, we didn't think they were that good either week, and yet they showed it. So that's the most positive way I can basically say the D-line seemed like it got to Jared Goff well. I think I've got somebody in the chat saying that they sacked Goff 5 times, which doesn't feel like what happened, did it?
I think a lot of that came later on in the game.
Yeah, and the Lions kept getting the yards back. Sack on, what was it, 2nd and 20, led to a 25-yard completion on 3rd down. Like, there were some ugly parts to this game.
Yeah, there were for sure. But hey, you know what? I mean, they've had to rely on their defense a lot. And I know a lot of people thought that last week's defensive performance wasn't good, but it's like, no, man, the Browns got a good offense. Like the Bears, the Bears did a good job last week, and I would say that the Bears had a better performance last week. But when you look at the box score, you're going to see 14 points. And again, really, it is nitpicky at this point for either one of us to be saying much of anything because the reality of it is they gave up 14 points. Yes, the Lions aren't very good. But, I mean, their defense came up, and especially came up, late in the game after that blown coverage again. How many times have we seen that, man, where it's like they have this commanding lead, and all of a sudden it starts slipping away little bit by little bit, and they were able to stop the bleeding today. Luckily, this wasn't a 3-point game, and we're sweating out an onside kick in the last 50 seconds of the game or whatever it was. So, at this point in time, I'll take it.
Sounds silly, but at the end of the day, that's why you've built the 17-point lead in the first place. And so you can give up a gash, get one back on 4th down that it felt like the Lions should have. If that was the Bears on offense, we would have said, you want to see blank quarterback and blank receiver make that play because he beat Duke Shelley. But you take the bounce as it comes. Either way, the unfortunate truth, Aaron, is that we've got enough negatives to talk about, be it the schedule and an injury that I have intentionally not mentioned yet, but we'll have to do that on the flip side right after the sponsors get their word in. Guys, we'll see y'all later. And we are back to Bear With Me with myself, Robert Schmitz, and Aaron Leming walking through the Chicago Bears game versus the Detroit Lions. The Bears have evened their record at 2-2. And Aaron, as you saw, and I know I did, the Bears took a huge blow on their offense as somebody that I might describe as their heart and soul went down with an injury that the broadcast would not show us a second time because, and I quote, it was too gruesome. What are you thinking about David Montgomery right now?
Well, I hate to say it, man, but that did not look good at all. And it's funny because I actually have a friend that's a Bears fan and has covered Iowa and Iowa State for the last 15 years, and he was basically saying that he's escaped some serious knee injuries a few times now, and I hate to say it, but I don't think he's escaping this one. And I mean, we've seen him, man, the last few years, like even the groin injury in training camp. A lot of us thought that was going to be a lot worse than it was, but the fact that they wouldn't show it, for one, is not good, and then two, the fact that he was ruled out so early is not a good thing. And it's very unfortunate because David Montgomery has been the Bears' best and most consistent offensive player. You could probably say, at least this year, one of the best last year as well. I think Allen Robinson would probably take the cake on that one. But yeah, man, a very unfortunate injury. Luckily, as we've seen, the Ravens have lost many of running backs this year. A lot of teams have lost running backs. Running back is at least one of the easier spots to be able to replace. And while I don't think Damian Williams is as good, I do think he has a little bit more burst. And I think him and, obviously we don't know what's going to go on with Tariq Cohen, but him and Khalil Herbert should at least be somewhat of an interesting combination moving forward if he is indeed out for a while. 100%. And also, I want to apologize. My cat is just like losing his mind right now. I'm sure you can hear it in the background.
It's like he just. But cats do what they want to do.
Yeah, he wants to go out, and we just got another cat. That's a whole different story. But he can't be out there right now, so he's just yelling at the door. And so I'm just basically gonna mute anytime I'm not on, or else he'll end up in this too.
So I feel like I have to come at the Montgomery injury both directions that I think are important, right? So on one direction, we have to go the human side. I am heartbroken for David Montgomery. So Pro Football Doc is speculating, because it is speculation until we hear anything, that it might be an MCL sprain. If it's not a tear in the ACL or MCL, first of all, that's amazing. Standard David Montgomery to avoid a huge injury and make it something recoverable. But on the more direct note, Montgomery looked extraordinarily improved. I actually thought he was setting himself up for the rare running back payday. And so to get that momentum cut out from under him with an injury to his lower body, obviously important for playing running back, that breaks my heart. Now, on the team-building perspective, this is exactly why you draft Khalil Herbert. This is why you pick up Damian Williams. This is why when you lose Tariq Cohen and you also lose David Montgomery, you've got a backup plan at maybe the most violent of the NFL skill positions. I actually have to tip my hat to Ryan Pace on this point because for a 6th-round pick, I always thought Khalil Herbert was a bit of a bargain, and now I still feel as if the Bears have a decent running back by committee right now with Williams and Herbert. Nothing crazy, nothing exceptional, but it's not as if they have dropped to the UDFA region at this point, especially based on the little bit of juice we've seen from, Juice in his kick returns. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're going to see a different kind of run game now moving forward. I think we can both agree that even if Montgomery's not out for the year, and I hope Pro Football Doc and David Chow's right, I hope that he is not out for the year. But I think we can both agree that he's probably going to miss some time. And for the meantime, you got two guys that have very different running styles from David Montgomery. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more outside zone because I think they're going to have to. That's just more of Damian Williams' game, at least in my opinion. And Khalil Herbert's going to be interesting as well. He's got some bursts. So, again, though, and maybe that kind of goes in with the mindset that both of us kind of have moving into this year where you're not looking at it from a perspective of, man, this is really going to ruin their season. You're looking at this as a perspective of, what can you see differently? How different is the run game going to look? How is a guy like Khalil Herbert going to look now? Maybe you bring up a guy like Artavis Pierce or, maybe Ryan Nall, whatever it may be. You have some options there to where you can kind of start to figure things out a little bit more. But I don't think this is it. From an emotional standpoint for David Montgomery, he's worked his butt off. There's been a lot of talk about how how much quicker he's become, stronger, not going down after contact. I mean, he's been their best offensive player consistently all year. So from an emotional standpoint, yeah, it's terrible. But from a football standpoint, looking at the Bears, yes, it will hurt them, but I don't think it's going to be a death blow, and I don't think we're going to be looking at a Ravens situation where every single guy on their on their depth chart right now on the NFL side, not talking about the practice squad side, but their actual active roster are guys that they went into the season not thinking that they were going to need. Latavius Murray, Le'Veon Bell. Tyson Williams. I mean, I know there's another veteran that I'm forgetting. So at least it's not at that point. Like to your point, this is why you go out and you draft a guy like Khalil Herbert. This is why you go out and you sign a guy like Damian Williams to a veteran minimum deal who has experience in this offense. I think this is a spot where you can lose a starter, and yes, it's going to hurt you a little bit, and yes, it does suck. But at the same time, this is also a spot where I think the Bears can kind of pick up where they've left off, and maybe we'll see some new things in the run game now.
I hope so. And honestly, if I could harp on something that I want to see more of from the Bears, goodness gracious, get the screen game going. It's not like it's some integral part of every NFL offense, but it feels as if right now, especially with Justin Fields in the game, your choices are a throw downfield or a run. And there are a lot more choices than that when it comes to NFL offense, for crying out loud. We saw, Damian Williams run an orbit motion screen just today, and one of the two wide receivers that was blocking for the play botched the block, and they still pick up 8 yards off of a quote-unquote free completion. That's the stuff that I want to see a little bit more of. It doesn't always have to be a wide receiver reverse or a flea flicker or something outstandingly complicated, but the Bears, I think, could do a lot of good to themselves to get out of exclusively running the ball or throwing the ball, which sound like your only two options, but you can screen the ball. You can use an option run where it feels like Fields may actually be a threat. Fields doesn't seem right now to be getting honored as much by the defense. As soon as, the first play passed for the Browns, where the Browns got punished for honoring Fields, it seems as if he's not pulling the ball, and I'd have to obviously go back to the All-22 to really suss out whether those are good or incorrect decisions, but more creativity in the run game than just let's run outside zone, and more creativity in the passing game than just we throw the ball short or we throw the ball deep. I know I'm speaking in very broad brush and generic terms, but there are more options than that. And I feel like the Bears could infuse a couple of those because they'll need them to beat the Ravens and the Raiders and the 49ers and the Packers. Like, the rest of their schedule is a meat grinder. And I don't think this offense works against a lot of those teams.
Well, and that kind of goes back to you have some building blocks now, right? You have some building blocks of what you were able to do today. But yeah, this offensive game plan is not going to work against better teams. I mean, that's just as simple as that. Even teams that maybe like the Packers, for example, who may not have that great of a defense, they're still a much better defense than what the Lions are. So, yeah, no, I agree. I think, this should be a building block in the way of Fields. It should be a building block in the way of, their offensive play calling, Bill Lazor, and using some new concepts as a whole to try to get them back in. Matt Nagy is supposed to be this offensive genius, and so far we haven't really seen this, but this is a good way to kind of start moving forward and building some other things. And again, I still don't think he's going to be able to save his job at this point. I could be wrong, but if you want to save your job, if you're Matt Nagy, this is kind of a starting point for you right now, and having to get creative. And like you said, Damian Williams he's got some more burst. He's good as a receiver. He's a really good fit in this offense. Khalil Herbert, not as much of a proven receiver, but he's also got some pop too. So, we're gonna see what happens. But I do think that because of this is going to force them to kind of change things up a little bit, and hopefully it's for the better. Hopefully this will kind of expand their horizons a little bit.
I sure hope so. But speaking of horizons, there's always something on it. And as we close the show out, let's get a little bit forward looking. Okay, so specifically talking about the Raiders game, do you think that the Bears are going to go back to Andy Dalton, or do you think they stick with Fields after today?
I think it's absolutely 100% Dalton. I think if Dalton's healthy, well, I should say it's 100% Dalton if Dalton's healthy. I think this week, my personal take, I think this week was a little smoke and mirrors in terms of the practice and him being limited and him being a game time decision. I think the entire plan this entire week has been Justin Fields is going to start, but we also kind of want to see where Andy Dalton is. I mean, we just referenced Pro Football Doc David Chow not too long ago. Yeah, I mean, he said multiple times that he thinks that this is going to be a multiple week injury, not a 2-week injury, but 3+ weeks. So we'll see. I think if Dalton is good to go, I think he's absolutely going to be your starter. But with the caveat being, like you just pointed out, man, this is a really tough schedule, and this doesn't get any easier for the Bears anytime soon. So just because Andy Dalton takes over next week doesn't mean that we're not going to see Justin Fields here in a few weeks. And also, just to kind of keep this in mind too, with this bone bruise that he has, he can make it worse. If it's not fully healed, he absolutely 100% can make it worse. And it also puts him at a higher risk for another knee injury, like an ACL, an MCL, something like that. So I would say this, even if Dalton comes back in and starts for the next few games, don't put a stamp on Justin Fields' season just yet, because I don't think it's anywhere close to being over. But I do think if Dalton is healthy, he's going to be the starter for Week 5.
Oh, sure. And not to sound too brash or maybe cold-hearted, I really don't care about the Bears' wins and losses at the end of this season. So even so, I do like watching a competitive team on Chicago Bears Sundays. And so, speaking in terms of trying to win the football games, I can't help but feel like going back to Dalton would just reset all the progress that they made this week. And I'll be the first to say, it's against the Lions. They scored 21 points in a little over a half against the Lions, seemed to take their foot off the gas, and kind of got punished for it. So let's not talk as if they had some absolutely extraordinary offensive day like Dallas did against a good Carolina team. It was fine. It was better than taking 9 sacks, that's for sure. But what frustrates me, Aaron, is that the offense that they ran today with Fields would be a waste in Dalton's hands. I don't think Dalton is going to hit seemingly 100% of his deep shots because Darnell Mooney pulled in the only one that was off target. So Dalton's going to hit maybe 50, maybe 40. He's really more of an intermediate thrower, and Justin Fields was throwing the ball 30, 35, 40 yards in the air. That's not Dalton's game. So they'd have to reset everything. They'd have to, quote unquote, go back to the way things were. They'd have to not rewrite the playbook, but start calling a different direction of it. And that just feels to me like, I mean, you'd almost be asking to get yourself fired, because that means another week, more than likely, of offensive schmuckerism. Like that we go into Las Vegas and just look very mushy, and then maybe you play a little bit better against the Packers. But I don't know where your head's at. I feel like this Raiders game is one that if you can come out of this 3-2, you could survive a lot of bad weeks against a lot of good football teams. But if you start that good football team slate 2-3, the 3 weeks afterwards might cost his job, Yeah.
No, I agree. And, I would actually, at least with the way they're playing right now, I'd actually label the Raiders in the good football category right now. I think they're a better team. They're definitely a better team than what I thought. I mean, obviously, it doesn't mean that they can't completely fall apart like they did last year. But at least as of right now, they're a 3-0 team. I mean, obviously, we'll have to see what happens today, and I can't even honestly remember. I think they might be playing right now. I hadn't even really looked at the schedule. It's been kind of a balance between football and, getting the last White Sox game in and watching all the craziness go on in baseball. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I do agree. And that's kind of the thing. Like within these first 4 weeks, you ideally wanted to come out 3-1. Obviously that didn't happen. They're 2-2. They're exactly where I expected them to be at. Now, I will say this. I did have them originally with a win against the Raiders. I don't know that that's going to happen now. I'm going to need to go back and watch a little bit more of what the Raiders have done. But yeah, it's just tough. You look at some of these games. Like San Francisco was even kind of a game that I had circled on the schedule where, I don't know that I'm buying San Francisco quite yet, but San Francisco is definitely better than I thought they would be, at least at this point. So yeah, but I think that kind of goes back to, if you go back to Dalton trying to quote unquote win games and you're not winning games, that opens the door up for Justin Fields again. So it's going to be a very delicate balance in terms of how they're going to be able to do this thing. But I do agree. If it was me personally, I'm keeping Justin Fields in there. There's no benefit right now to Andy Dalton coming back in. Keep a fire lit under Justin Fields and whatever else. But And I think that's kind of the unfortunate part with this bone bruise that Dalton had is it doesn't really leave them enough time to have Justin Fields pull a Justin Herbert, right? It doesn't really leave them enough time to leave no doubt, and that's kind of the unfortunate part. But the thing I'll continue to circle back to, at least mentally for myself, is Justin Fields had a good game today.
Yes.
A good game, and there's nothing that you can do to take away from that at this point. So even if he goes back on the bench for the rest of the year, which I don't think is going to happen, but even if he goes back on the bench for the rest of the year, this is still a much better way to go back on the bench and sit the rest of the season than it would have been a week ago. So that is at least a big plus in itself.
I think what frustrates me is, so there's a lot of different things that, as I've learned more and more and more about what goes on inside an NFL locker room, I have realized that there are a lot of misconceptions that are easy to unintentionally talk yourself into, right? Like, let's take a week of practice, Aaron. A week of practice is closer to 1 day of practice and 2 walkthroughs and a bunch of meetings, because tomorrow the whole Bears team is just going to be taking ice baths and recovering from the beating that they took today. On Tuesday, probably still going to be recovering mostly. Maybe they'll have some meetings. Wednesday and Thursday, those are your real practice days. Before Friday, you do a walkthrough. Saturday, you travel, maybe another walkthrough, and then you play again Sunday. Like, reinstalling an offense, it's not a 7-day thing. That's why people do these over the bye, more than likely. And so for the Bears to continue their habit, we've seen this before, Aaron, week 3 to week 4 last year. That was Atlanta to the Colts for Foles, wholesale change. We've seen them do wholesale change for Mitch a little bit afterwards. I think that was actually closer to the bye, though. Like, they keep just ripping the plan up and drawing up a new one and trotting out something that's just mushy. And I don't know. It drives me wild, but at this point, I know I'm just strapping in and waiting for it. So at this point, when I look going forward, I know I am excited to see what the Bears can do against some quality competition. I think you said it well. The Raiders are playing really good football right now, but it's just a matter of seeing not only what decisions the Bears are going to make, but how well the other players on their teams besides Justin Fields can prove themselves. Because at this point, I know you talked about it, like, there are a lot of things that we could throw in and talk this, that, or the other about Justin Fields and say, maybe Justin Fields, like, could have played a little bit better here. Maybe he didn't need to make that mistake. But as far as a rookie goes, he showed us that he could do step one. Step one is show us you can handle the things that you did well in college. Today, he did just that. Not a lot to be upset about, at least in my opinion. And I'll just say this, because, Aaron, this might be the hardest part to hear. Bears fans really soak in this one. We might not get another for a really long time. Like, there's a world where a game like this just doesn't come together quite like it did until the Lions game comes around. Either way, it'll be interesting to watch as we move forward. Guys, that has been Bear With Me. Oh, looks like, okay, we might be able to reset off of that. Thank you, Jordan, for the comment about production. Aaron, do I have you? Are you consistent at this point? Muted? You're muted?
Yep, you're right. Yeah, I was muted. Yeah, I think so. Dude, I don't know what is going on. Like, the video keeps cutting out, and I keep getting booted out. So
that's weird. Feel free to cut your video off if it helps. We're just gonna wrap the show up at this point.
Okay, fair enough, man. Yeah, so I caught
no worries.
Pieces, and then it was like, oh man, this is just.
I was 100% just covering for the fact that it was like, and I lost him. So I'm gonna pretend like we're still having a conversation and nobody has to know. But thankfully, he's still here.
Solid. Yeah, now, of course. We're wrapping up the show. It'll be good.
All right, ready?
Yep, let's do it.
But either way, Aaron, that'll about do it for this one. So let's dive into final thoughts, whether they're forward-looking or about this game, before we wrap things up. What are yours?
Well, I think my biggest one right now is even if Fields goes back on the bench next week, this was a good building block. And I think now, as Bears fans, that the fear of ruining the development and completely damaging Justin Fields, I think we can put, at least for his first game against the Browns, I think we can put that to bed. And I think, again, man, that's the biggest thing moving forward for the Bears. Like, there can be a lot of issues for this team moving into the offseason, but the one issue that you cannot have is damaging Justin Fields. And I think moving out of this game, we saw that there is absolutely, and I really wasn't that worried about it. It's Justin Fields, man. This dude is rock solid mentally. He always has been. I think he's always going to be. But I think if there's one thing that we can take away from this game, win, lose, draw, whatever, all the injuries, it doesn't matter, is the fact that Justin Fields is clearly not that damaged at all by what happened last week. He was able to basically flip it and say, okay, I got some learning opportunities off of it. I'm able to build off of this, and here we are. So I think that would honestly be my main takeaway, and that is absolutely 100% positive, man. After everything that happened last week, getting sacked 9 times, having probably historically one of the worst possible NFL debuts that you can possibly have as a rookie quarterback, and yet he was able to bounce back and produce what he was able to produce this week. I think, man, that is more than anything, that's probably the most important thing.
Oh, man, I hadn't even thought about the bounce back angle from it. I mean, we could talk, look, I hate talking about drops, because when I talk about drops, I feel like I'm just talking about Trubisky again, and that's not what I want to do. But so you look at what Fields has got this season, I feel like he's put way better tape on than the stats are going to show, because some of the throws that he made to both Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson today were exceptionally difficult. Robinson should have already hauled a touchdown in the Cincinnati game, but all that to say that I think what can be lost sometimes in all this rookie development stuff is that a rookie's job isn't to be consistent. A rookie's job is to flash. That's really it. It is that simple. You get consistent in your second, usually your third year of NFL professionalism, but in your first year, just show us that you have it, whatever it is. And right now, Aaron, I'm very confident that if Justin Fields gets no better, you could build a successful Tennessee-style offense around Justin Fields in his current state and still compete at a high level. Now, the bright side is, I think Fields is going to get plenty better. It's just a matter of waiting, being patient, not feeling like in week 8 he has to look like some massively different player. Maybe he does. Hopefully he does. But we need to have realistic expectations about what Justin Fields is going to look like in different scenarios. It won't look like the Lions game every day, but we can go back for a little while at least and say, but he made these throws when he needed to. And one thing that we never even talked about, Aaron, was that on 3rd and 5, Fields dropped back 3 steps, fired the ball to Allen Robinson for a huge completion that basically put the game on ice. So there's a lot to like in this game. His running scramble, that throw to Kmet, I will talk about until I am blue in the face, because that was Mahomes, that was Watson, that was Russell Wilson.
It was an excellent throw.
That was Aaron Rodgers. That was that upper echelon quarterback stuff that I got a whiff of for basically the first time watching a Chicago Bears person do it instead of watching somebody do it to our defense. So, I don't know. I am aglow this week, not because the Bears looked so good, but because Fields did, and that's all that matters,
No, I'm right there with you, and that's the thing. I think we kind of both echoed it. Wins and losses don't really matter right now, man. The development of Justin Fields matters. The development of this roster matters, and moving forward, 2022 and beyond is what the focus needs to be. And I would say that we absolutely saw everything we needed to and more from Fields today. And again, just the rebound factor for me is a big one, especially, God bless him, but especially with what happened with Trubisky over the 4 years, there were a lot of moments when it felt like Trubisky was beat down by moments, and it was good. We see that with a lot of quarterbacks. We see that with a lot of young quarterbacks. It's not just a Trubisky thing. I know it's easy to kind of circle back to that, but it's easy to circle back to that because that's what we've seen as Bears fans. That's what we've seen watching this team. But a lot of guys don't have the mental part of the game, and I think that's one thing with Justin Fields that we've known and we're continuing to learn, and I think we'll continue to see is even if he has a bad game, he can rebound from it and he can still be the player that we all expected him to be. So that more than anything, man, that's the biggest takeaway for me. And that's why I can take so much positivity out of this game, regardless of win or loss. The fact that Justin Fields is able to bounce back and he did the things that we were expecting him to do. I even tweeted it out. This is the Justin Fields that we were expecting. Mm-hmm. We're finally getting to see that, and that is a great thing.
Absolutely. Aaron, thank you so much for jumping on. Where can folks find your work online?
Yep, you can find me at Aaron Leming on Twitter, at Aaron Leming NFL. Messed up my own handle there. My cat is getting crazy right now. And then also you can read my work at Windy City Gridiron. You can also read it at bearreport.com. So yeah, I usually do 2 things a week for both and tweet way more than I should. I don't know why I tweet as much as I, but here we are. So yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me.
I completely understand when it comes to tweeting. Seriously, Aaron, thank you so much for jumping on. Great having you.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate that.
And that records the technical podcast. Feel free. I have no idea if you pulled the live show up, Aaron, but people have been asking you questions throughout the show. So
well, the problem is I'm on my phone.
Well, can you pull it up on your laptop? Like the YouTube link for the show?
No, I didn't know. You see, this is the first. I think this might be the first time because I've recorded once or twice with you, but I want to say that this is the first time that
it's live.
We've done it on. Yeah, that it's live and we've done it on Discord because I want to say the last time it was on like Google or something.
Well, we can do it a lot of different ways, but when you're on audio, you've got a lot more leeway. I feel like because finding something that's free and it shares video. Is complicated. and Discord has been bad enough that I should have another solution, but I have been doing other things. And so
it's not a big I've done a lot of different platforms. This is the one I just really wasn't overly familiar with at all.
All right, so I'll throw a couple questions at you that you've seen, and then we don't have to stay on for long, but I always like to do a little bit of Q&A afterwards. So, all right, so somebody said, how about we not go full Miami 2020? Does this have Miami 2020 vibes with Fitzpatrick and Tua, or does it kind of feel like its own unique and not necessarily better soup that the Bears have created for themselves with the quarterback?
Well, I think in terms of team success, I don't think this is going to be a team that challenges for a playoff spot. But I do think, really, I think what this is going to come down to, right, is you have the convenient excuse right now where you can say, okay, Andy Dalton was hurt. We're going to put him back in. We haven't seen, you haven't seen, quote unquote, enough from Justin Fields. You're going to put him, you're going to put Andy Dalton back in. But I also firmly believe that this isn't, if Dalton does start week 5, this isn't going to be the last time we see Fields. But what I will say is I don't think it's going to be the back and forth. I think there's a convenient excuse with Andy Dalton that he was hurt, so you put him back in because he's quote unquote your starter. But I think once we see Justin Fields again, there's not going to be that flip flop back and forth where you're trying to win games and get into the playoffs. So I do think once Justin Fields is named the starter, and not because Andy Dalton's hurt, but actually named the starter, I think he's going to continue to be the starter.
Mm-hmm. And I can't help but feel as if games just like this one, where Fields has throws, he's making the throws, are going to set up a media dynamic, which, look, it's not like it matters that they have a media dynamic one way or another, but it does set the narrative against Laser and Nagy, where I was thinking about this, Aaron, like, okay, so Nagy was in a no-win scenario today. He hands things over to Laser and the Bears look good. What was he doing? He hands things over to Laser and things look meh. How is this not better for 3 years? He hands things over to Laser and they look bad. What is going on under your tenure? Like, there was no winning, and we are drifting into that first scenario where the Bears looked better, and everybody goes, okay, Nagy, what do you do here? But it is going to be really interesting to see, like, how things go, because I think today does a ton to help Fields, where Fields doesn't have to look like the problem no matter just about what happens, because he hit the opportunities he got, and that matters.
Well, for sure. No, I agree. I'm right there with you. And that's the thing is it's just, I think what it comes down to for not only fans, but the organization and Matt Nagy is not putting too much expectations on him. And I think that's kind of the battle where you're seeing right now where, they can put Andy Dalton back in, and if they suck, it's on Andy Dalton, right? Like there's even kind of deflection from Matt Nagy to where it's like, well, Andy Dalton's not very good. He's a journeyman quarterback at this point in his career. Versus if you put Justin Fields out there and he struggles, then all of a sudden there's a lot more panic. And I think this is also kind of an angle for him to save his job, because now you have these things in your back pocket where you can say, yeah, but I turned the play calling over to Bill Lazor and things got better.
Right.
I was able to go to, back to Andy Dalton. Things didn't work out with Dalton, but we have this stud young rookie quarterback who's going to lead us to the promised land eventually. Like it's a multi-level thing. It's a multi-layer thing with Matt Nagy right now, and with this offense, with Justin Fields, with the quarterback decision as a whole, where there's so many different ways it can go. And I think you can kind of shuffle the deck enough times where I think that Matt Nagy, being Matt Nagy, probably thinks he can show enough improvement to where, he can feel safe keeping his job, or, at least making a case for his job.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now we have to answer the other question, right? Which is much more baseball than football usually. But if it was you, Aaron, fire sale or not? Who are you looking to jettison, if anybody? And what do you want to do given the impending potential organizational change?
We're talking about for the Bears, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, yeah. So, man, at this point in time, and it's kind of weird. I threw it out. I threw it out on Twitter earlier in the week, and I basically said, like, Matt Nagy catches a lot of heat, justifiably so. Ryan Pace is the one who built this roster, and if it's me, I'm keeping the same exact mindset that I kept this off going into this last offseason. Both need to go. Ryan Pace has had 7 years, and people keep saying, well, look at what he inherited and look at what he built. Okay, that's great. And not saying every GM is able to rebuild the roster. Ryan Pace did a pretty dang good job with this rebuild, but I think when he missed on Trubisky, and he realized that he missed on Trubisky, instead of basically biting the bullet and saying, okay, we have to keep our roster from getting older while also finding a way to get a quarterback, he goes out and he does what he did in the 2020 offseason. And really, you could even make some arguments in the 2019 offseason as well. And I think that alone is enough for me. And, we've kind of had this conversation as well. There's been other people who've kind of chimed in on it as well on Twitter, where people seem to be more willing to give Ryan Pace a pass right now, while also not really acknowledging that Ryan Pace hired Matt Nagy. Ryan Pace is this is his second coach. If you give him another coach, you're giving him a third coach. He's had one winning season going into year 7 right now. He's had 2 playoff appearances. One of those where they backed into the playoffs last year at 8-8. So, and he has no playoff wins. At what point do you finally say, okay, while he did a better job than Phil Emery, thank the Lord for that one, at the same time, like, when do you finally say, okay, this isn't working? We've all seen it. We've been Bears fans long enough to see when the reset button needs to be hit. And at least in my personal opinion, while this isn't going to be a full-on rebuild like it was when Ryan Pace took over, I think there are some core pieces here, quarterback being the most important piece with Justin Fields. I do think that a new, fresh set of eyes needs to come in, both as a GM and as a head coach. And that's just where I'm going to this is where I'm going to maintain to be at. Even if they end up finishing, let's just say 9-8, and end up sneaking into the playoffs again, my feelings are still going to be the same, because this is not a team that is built to win right now.
Yeah, what frustrates me about Pace, and I've started doing this with Nagy too, and it's once you start walking down this, Aaron, you can get to a dark place pretty quick. Mm-hmm. But where you start saying, okay, so how many guys could come in and do a better job, but also how many guys could come in and do worse? So in Nagy's case, for instance, especially Nagy, the OC, I think you could pick a ton of offensive guys around the league, and it's hard to do worse than what the Bears have output. Like, I think their rankings are in the bottom 25, or like beyond 25th, at least beyond 22nd, every single season after 2018, which was very low in yards. They were just high in points. So that the head coach feels like it's not even a discussion at this point. But the GM part gets really interesting, because while I feel like Pace is showing his consistent chops in collegiate scouting in the late round aspects of the draft, it also feels like the early picks, the high picks, haven't contributed quite enough over time. Like, this is 7 years of first round picks where the Bears have either had Kevin White situations, they've traded those picks away for Mac. We've got Roquan Smith. That's great. And outside of that, not a ton out of the first round. Maybe Leonard Floyd, but he didn't even stick with the team. So how many guys could come in and do a worse job than Pace? I don't know. And I don't really want to get into it, because I feel like technically you could make a roster awful if you weren't even trying to make it good in the first place. But yeah. I don't feel as if the Bears... Jimmy Graham is everybody's favorite example, if only because Jimmy Graham's the most obvious one. But I don't think he had a target today, and we pushed his money into the future. You know, like, what are we doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, why is Nick Foles making the money that he's making and costs a 4th-round pick to be sitting on the bench as a third quarterback? That a guy that Matt Nagy doesn't even really want to have. You know, he didn't even want to give him a shot to start right now. So it's like, what are we doing there? The only time that he's going to be active on the roster is when one of the guys are injured. You know, it's
right
there. Same thing with Danny Trevathan. I can't imagine that if Danny Trevathan was playing at a high level, they would have IR'd him. Right. I'll be honest about that. I don't think that you know there. But again, man, really the only mistake, quote unquote mistake, that Ryan Pace made that has actually played decently well right now is Robert Quinn. Robert Quinn is having, you know, but he's having his on year. He has off year, on year, off year, on year. This is his on year. Again, I don't know that I'm even keeping a guy like Robert Quinn around next year. But yeah, it's the thing is that I think you can make different arguments with Ryan Pace. Matt Nagy is an obvious at this point, right? You bring him in as an offensive mind. The offense is somehow worse than it was with John Fox. That's just insane to me. But yeah, I think with Ryan Pace, again, you have to go back to this is year 7. He executed a rebuild very well. He whiffed on one player, and since then it has been a lot of bad moves from him over the last 2 off seasons. And I just don't think, I don't know, man. I just don't think you look at the cap situation. You know, you point out how well he's done with his mid-round picks, yet he continues to trade away a lot of his mid-round picks. So, and that's kind of the other thing is I just there's mindsets, and the same thing with Matt Nagy, where I just don't think you can break it, and I don't think it's something that you can live with. As we've seen the last few years, they've been 8-8, 8-8. They're 2-2 right now. That's just not something you can live with, because 8-8 getting you. This isn't baseball. You can't just get into the playoffs and all of a sudden everything automatically resets and you can beat any team on any given day. You know, with football is a lot more lopsided, as we've seen in the playoffs almost every year. We saw it in the playoffs with the Bears last year. Just because you get in, it doesn't mean anything. Nope. It's just not the same sport, you know? So, yeah, I don't think building playoff appearances at 8 or 9 wins and being a first round out does you any good at this point. And I think that's actually kind of, mirror to mediocrity more than anything at this point, where it just, in my opinion, you have to end the cycle at some point. And but again, the nice thing is this isn't 2015 all over again, where he comes in, or 2014, whatever it was, whenever he came in. Gosh. It's not that situation where you need to rebuild the entire roster. I think the Bears are just a smart general manager and some smart moves away from being able to get back in and compete. The biggest key out of this all is Justin Fields has to be the guy. And, at this point in time, as long as he's the guy, you can do a lot of different things. But I think a fresh set of eyes needs to be in there. And that's why I'm personally going to be in the camp, unless they magically turn around and go 11-6 and get in the playoffs and win a game and start showing some real promise. I just don't see it, man. I think we've seen the cycle. The cycle's over with. It's time to bring in somebody else and hope that they can get it right this time.
I think somebody said it in the chat really well, where it looks like it was a Kusai that said, we are the oldest team in the NFL. We're low on draft capital. We have a ton of dead cap, and we're still not a contender. And so that describes, I think, Ryan Pace perfectly. I mean, I'm at the point, Aaron, where given that we're probably, I think you'd agree, we're targeting a competitive 2022 team, but not a contender, just competitive. Like the 2020, maybe a little better than the 2020 Chargers, but the 2023 season is where we're really targeting winning. So at this point, Robert Quinn, to me, if I was trying to really take that long view, would be playing his way into a trade. And as many of these other defensive players as I can afford to trade, if you've got to trade Akeem Hicks so that you can therefore take on the Robert Quinn trade's dead cap, I would just figure it out. I don't want to have a huge fire sale. I mean, I actually have no idea, because I don't even know if I really care about keeping the locker room together in a season where I already know I'm firing the head coach. But there's a lot of discussion to be had at this point, because if you told me, Aaron, that the Bears could pick up, I don't know, 1 extra third, 1 extra fourth, 2 extra fifths, and $60 million in cap space between now and trading a couple players away, ooh, that sounds awfully nice, if only because then you've got some depth on your roster and a lot of flexibility in free agency to try and solve a lot of the problems that you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, they've been limited in resources for quite a while now, and you need to get resources back in order to retool. I wouldn't even call this a rebuild. It would be a retool. They need to retool. They need to put better offensive talent around. They need to shed a lot of the age on this team, and they need to start getting some better, younger talent defensively and kind of maintain what they've got right now and, get better over time. So that's where I'm at.
Somebody says there's a third round of the draft, and I laugh because the Pace hasn't picked in it, I think, 2 years running now. And
No.
I mean, that to me, if you asked like my opinion on Ryan Pace, and by the way, we had 15 people have the subscription thing pop up during the podcast. Can't talk about it when we're recording the podcast. Thank you guys for subscribing. But anyways, back to the point. Ryan Pace doesn't seem to know what the term backup plan means, and it drives me wild. We're like, hey, we're going to fix the offensive line because Sam Mustipher's our center. Heck yeah. And Tevin Jenkins is going to be an all-star rookie. Heck yeah. And Jermaine Ifedi is going to be an all-pro. Heck yeah. And it's like, well, what if none of those happen? Like,
and we're seeing that play out right now. We're seeing all that play out right now. And that's the biggest issue is it's, the whole conviction thing was cute the first time around, but seven times around and, 5 misses out of those 7 swings. And this is when you start seeing a lot of issues.
Yep. It kind of hurts, but, the Bears have Justin Fields, and that helps a lot.
Yes, it does.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to keep you for too much longer because we got the second half of NFL action. All right,
so Green Bay,
popping
Pittsburgh,
up right now. Thank you.
I think one of the major storylines, Guru, is obviously
Sunday
MVS going on
here. But either way, Aaron, thank you so much for jumping on to talk through things. A pleasure having you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate it. So I'm gonna end up watching the rest of this White Sox game, and then I'm starving somehow. So I'll probably eat after that. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and hopefully this will be the nice little building block that we've all been kind of looking for. So we'll see.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks so much for jumping on and listening. We will be back with you more throughout the week. Thank you so much, and bear down.